Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the YouTube channel GMAT Titans. I'm your trainer Hitanshu Munjal, and today we are going to discuss another important aspect of critical reasoning arguments, namely the assumption. So, an assumption is something the author believes to be true but does not say directly in the argument. It is a hidden idea that the argument depends on. If this hidden idea is not true, the argument falls apart. The assumption is an essential part of an argument because it logically connects the premise to the conclusion. In other words, an assumption is the bridge that connects premise to the conclusion. Therefore, each argument can be expressed in the form of the following equation: premise plus assumption is equal to conclusion. So let's have a look at a very simple example. Argument: Rahul must be at home because his car is parked outside. Hidden assumption: Rahul always parks his car outside only when he is at home. So if we fit the argument into the above equation, it looks something like this. Rahul's car is parked outside, premise, plus Rahul always parks his car outside only when he is at home, assumption, is equal to Rahul must be at home, conclusion. So now why we say that Rahul always parks his car outside only when he is at home as an assumption? Because there is no such information in the argument, but the author is simply assuming this fact to be true. That's why he has given the conclusion that Rahul must be at home. Another reason this is called an assumption, because the reality could be somewhat different. Rahul might have parked his car and went to a friend's house who is living nearby, or he might have gone to the market to buy some goods. So that's why we are calling this part an assumption, because there is no definite information in the argument which states that, or which tells us that Rahul always parks his car outside when he is at home. Now let's have a look at another simple example. Premise: when we drive at 100 kilometers per hour, we reach Delhi in 4 hours. Conclusion: so tomorrow if I start driving from my residence at 100 kilometers per hour, I shall touch Delhi border at 10 a.m. Hidden idea assumption: my driving speed shall not drop below 100 kilometers per hour at any point during my journey. So why I'm calling this an assumption? Because the reality could be that while driving on the highway, I could encounter traffic congestion, or there might be some flyover being constructed on the highway and they have created a diversion. So in which we have to pass through a village road and then come back to the highway again, which can waste a lot of time, and or there might be some kind of a protest going on the highway and the highway might be blocked. So this is basically why we call this is an assumption, because there is no definite way to tell that my speed will not drop below 100 kilometers per hour at any point during my journey. So again, when we express the above argument in the form of the aforesaid equation, it looks something like this. Premise: when we drive at 100 kilometers per hour, we reach Delhi in 4 hours, plus assumption: the driving speed will not drop below 100 kilometers per hour during the entire journey, is equal to conclusion. Therefore, if I start from my residence at 6 a.m., I will reach Delhi border at 10 a.m. Now let's have a look at assumption in detail. And assumption is the most important of all the critical reasoning concepts, question types. This is because assumption will give you the answer to 5 question types. Find the assumption questions, evaluate the argument questions, strengthen questions, weaken questions, and flaw questions. We will see the connection between assumptions and each of these question types in the subsequent lectures, but first let's take a look at assumption itself. Assumption: the hidden link in an argument. An assumption is an unstated premise that connects the stated premise to the conclusion and makes the argument work logically. It is something the author takes for granted as true without directly saying it. In other words, an assumption is the invisible glue that holds the reasoning together. If an assumption is false, the entire argument can fall apart. Identifying assumptions helps you evaluate whether the argument's logic is strong, weak, or flawed. Let's take a look at the following argument. Despite the support of the president, it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass. A bipartisan group of 15 senators has announced that it does not support the legislation. So conclusion is, it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass. Why? Premise. A bipartisan group of 15 senators has announced that it does not support the legislation. So here the situation is that the author of this argument is hoping that a new defense bill will pass, but later on when he is watching TV, he hears the news that a bipartisan group of 15 senators has announced that it does not support the legislation. So based on this information, the author reaches the conclusion that it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass. So now in order to figure out the assumption, we have to ask the question that just because a bipartisan group of 15 senators has announced that it does not support the legislation, will it be also true that the new defense bill will not pass? Okay. So obviously, just mere announcement is not enough for the stopping of the bill. These 15 senators either have to have significant support with them in order to stop the legislation from passing, or the support of these 15 senators must be extremely important for the passing of the legislation. So that is how the bill will pass. And if they do not support the legislation, or they do not have the required numbers, the new defense bill will not pass. So therefore, the author is assuming that the support of these 15 senators is extremely important for the passing of the legislation, or these 15 senators have numbers with them which will enable these senators to stop the passing of the bill. So let's read further. In order for this argument to be convincing, the reader has to make an assumption that because 15 senators do not support the bill will probably not pass. If you don't assume that the opposition of 15 senators means that the bill is unlikely to pass, the argument fails. Thus, assumptions are necessary to a successful argument. Now let's read further. To find the assumption or assumptions in an argument, you need to look for a gap in the reasoning of the argument. You can often accomplish this by asking yourself the following question. Just because premise is true, does it really mean conclusion is true? For example, let's take a look at another argument. The rise of obesity among citizens of country Y has been linked to a variety of health problems. In response to this situation, the country's largest health organization has called for food manufacturers to help combat the problem. Since the leading manufacturers of the nation's food industry have agreed to provide healthier alternatives, reduce sugar and fat content, and reduce advertisements for unhealthy foods, it is likely that country Y will experience a decrease in obesity-related health problems. So the conclusion is country Y will experience a decrease in obesity-related health problems. Why? Premise is the leading members of the nation's food industry have agreed to provide healthy alternatives, reduce sugar and fat content, and reduce advertisements for unhealthy foods. Now let's ask ourselves this question. Just because it's true that the food industry has agreed to provide healthier alternatives, reduce sugar and fat content, and reduce advertisements for unhealthy foods, does it really mean that obesity-related health problems will decrease? If you accept this argument, you must assume that the food industry's actions will lead to a decrease in obesity related health problems. So let me rephrase this assumption that only and only the food industry's actions will lead to a decrease in obesity related health problems. Now, why I am saying that? I am saying this because we don't know whether the citizens of country Y will adopt those healthier alternatives. Therefore, that is the missing link or the assumption required by the argument. So let me just explain this on the whiteboard. So here is the argument. It says, since the leading members of the nation's food industry have agreed to provide healthier alternatives, reduce sugar and fat content, and reduce advertisements for unhealthy foods. So this is the premise. Then we add the assumption, only and only the food industry's actions would lead to decline in the obesity related health problems. Now we get the conclusion. It is likely that the country Y will experience a decline in obesity related health problems. Now let's read further. Practice locating assumptions. Argument 1 says, City University recently announced the retirement of Professor Jones. Professor Jones is a leading biologist and widely published author, and her presence was a major factor in many students' decisions to attend City University. The university predicts no decline in enrollment, however, because it plans to hire 2 highly credentialed biology professors to replace Professor Jones. So here conclusion obviously is the university predicts no decline in enrollment, because we have learned in earlier lectures that conclusion can also be in the form of a prediction. And the word because indicates the reason for the conclusion. Therefore, the statement after because is the premise. So it plans to hire 2 highly credentialed biology professors to replace Professor Jones is the reason for the university's confidence that there will be no decline in enrollment. So therefore it is the premise. Now we have to work out the assumption. So assumption can be figured out from the language of the argument itself. The argument says Professor Jones is a leading biologist and widely published author, and her presence was a major factor in many students' decisions to attend City University. It means that the students who decided to enroll in the City University only by knowing the fact that Professor Jones is teaching there, which tells us that Professor Jones was very popular among the students, and therefore here we can say that the university is making the assumption that the 2 highly credentialed biology professors will be as popular as Professor Jones was among the students. All right. Now let's move on to the next argument. It says it is unjust to charge customers under the age of 25 more to rent a car than those over the age of 25. After all, most states allow people as young as 16 to have a driver's license, and all states allows 18 years olds to 18-year-olds a right to vote. So here the conclusion is it is unjust to charge customers under the age of 25 more to rent a car than those over the age of 25. Why I am calling this as a conclusion? Because it has the word unjust. The author has used the word unjust. That means here the author is expressing his opinion or expressing his claim. So whenever we call something unjust, unfair, that means we are expressing our opinion. So here also this is the author's opinion, and hence the conclusion. So on what basis the author says that author reaches this conclusion? he reaches this conclusion on the basis of the information that both states allow people as young as 16 to have driver's license, and all states allow 18 years old the right to vote. So now let's first understand why the rental companies are charging customers more, customers under the age of 25 more to rent a car. This is because probably the rental companies think that the youngsters who are under the age of 25 are inexperienced and irresponsible drivers, therefore they can cause liabilities for the rental company, and the higher rent will deter such individuals from renting the car, and also cover any costs in case some youngster below 25 decides to rent a car. Then this higher rent will cover the liabilities caused to them in the form of higher insurance or whatever. And the premise is that, the author thinks that this practice is unjust, and the reason for him thinking is that people as young as 16 can get a driver's license, and people as young as 18 years old get the right to vote. So obviously here the author's assumption is that as soon as a youngster gets a driver's license and an 18-year-old gets the right to vote, he or she automatically becomes a experienced and responsible driver. Next argument: it is easy to demonstrate that extraterrestrial life exists by simply looking at our own solar system. In our solar system there are 8 planets, and at least one of them obviously has life on it. Thus roughly 12.5% of planets in the universe should have life on them. So here conclusion is obvious from the word thus. Therefore the conclusion is roughly 12.5% of planets in the universe should have life on them. And on what basis the author reaches this conclusion? The information is, in our solar system there are 8 planets and at least one of them obviously has life on it. So the ratio of planets having life versus the planets not having life is 1:8. So here the assumption is that the ratio of 1:8 applies to the rest of the universe, or the 12.5% of the 12.5% percentage applies to the rest of the universe as well. So that means that in our solar system, wherever there are 8 planets, one will have life on it. Or if we extend the example, any solar system, suppose having 16 planets, 2 will have life in it, and any solar system which has 4 planets, as per this assumption, half of a planet will have life and the other half will be dead or barren. So let's move on to the next argument. State A is facing a serious budget shortfall for the upcoming year. Recent polls indicate that 58% of voters in Township B approve of a proposed 2-cent gasoline tax in order to make up the deficit. It is clear, therefore, that the leaders of State A should institute the gas tax. So what we have understood in the previous lecture is that the conclusion can also be in the form of a recommendation. So here the recommendation is that the leaders of State A should institute the gas tax. So therefore this is the conclusion. And on the basis of which information this recommendation has been made? Information is that recent polls indicate that 58% of voters in Township B approve of a proposed 2-cent gasoline tax in order to make up the deficit. So this becomes the premise. Now here we say that there is a shift in the language, because in the initial part of the argument they are referring to State A, and in the later part of the argument they are saying they are mentioning Township B. So if we read this in the Indian context, Township B is Ropar, and state A is Punjab. So obviously the assumption is that if majority of the residents of township B have approved the proposed raise in tax on petrol, the rest of the Punjab, the residents of rest of the Punjab have also agreed to the proposal or will also agree to the proposal. So that's all for today, guys. Thank you for joining, and if you have any doubts, you can write in the comment section. Please like and subscribe our channel. Thank you for joining. Good evening.